Albert Einstein once said, "If you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself." Sometimes technology makes us feel like 6-year-olds, especially when hackers try to use the internet to steal something from each of us. If you think you have nothing of value to a hacker, think again. You and everyone you know are exactly who hackers target every day. This is DIY Cyber Guy with David W. Schrofer. Every week, he will show you how cybersecurity can be as easy as locking up your house at night. Now, here is your host, David W. Schrofer.
Okay, welcome back, everybody, to DIY Cyber Guy. Now, there's some really interesting ways that hackers are going after your data and your money and your Bitcoin and your identity, and this show is all about giving you an easy, step-by-step guide to understanding these latest hacks and understanding the latest technology that's out there. And it's never been easier to listen. You can watch us on our new YouTube channel, or you can download our free podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Player FM, Stitcher, and most recently on Spotify. So you can find us anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Now, today we want to talk about blockchain. Okay, so if you're an adult and you're alive today, here's why you need to know what blockchain is. It's a distributed ledger, not a central ledger. So the fundamental idea is there's no one company or no one regulatory body or no one government that is keeping an eye or responsible for the ledger. It's distributed among all the different companies and all the different users that touch it. So why does that matter? It removes the need for a trusted company or government or regulatory body to keep track of it all. Instead of one of those bodies keeping track of it, we all keep track of it because we're all using the blockchain the way it's meant to be used. If that sounds confusing, maybe it is. So here with me to explain all that and break down exactly why this is such a critical technology for the next 10 years of human existence, in my opinion, is Ari Zoldan. Now, Ari is the chairman of Quantum Media Group, and he's the CMO of Uptherian, and he's also the chair of the Media and Development Committee for the Zahn Center of Innovation at City College. He's a regular on Fox, CNN, CNBC, and NBC. He covers technology, media, and business trends. He also holds press credentials on Capitol Hill and at the United Nations. Welcome, Ari.
Thank you. Great to be here, David.
Thanks for coming on the show. So fundamentally, you can probably do a better job explaining it than I could. Why is blockchain a critical thing to understand as a person alive today?
Sure. No, you've actually did a great job, David, in terms of explaining it. So the answer to that is that similar to what you said, it's a distributed ledger. So a lot of feedback that I get from people is, okay, who cares and why does that matter? And the reason why it matters is today because we're all online and we all have a digital footprint, and probably 3/4 of us at one time or another has had our identity hacked or compromised. So if you think about the beginning of the internet, it was about the democratization of ourselves, right? I mean, everybody pretty much had a share of this huge ecosystem where you're able to trade information back and forth.
If you had something to say, you could post it.
Exactly.
If they wanted to read it, they could find it.
And it was a soapbox, and there was really no idea, no thought about identity theft and hacking. It just wasn't something I think that was on people's radar. But what happened over the next 2 decades, is that all that information that was online started to be collected by 3 major companies, right? Those companies are Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. So if you think about the concept of the internet and what's happening right now, it's really that these 3 companies are holding 3/4 of the world's data. Mm-hmm. So what blockchain does is that it opens this ecosystem up where it says, hey, wait, let's put a halt on this. And what happens is we don't want, or the community doesn't want, our identities, our information, our digital footprint to be owned by 3 companies. And obviously, because David, they're vulnerable to hacking or manual distortion, so on and so forth. So what blockchain does is it comes along and it says, hey, let's take that information back from these big companies and bring it back to the quote unquote people, and then enter blockchain. So blockchain is a distributed network that takes the information and distributes it to millions of companies or millions of computers around the world. And what it does is that it verifies and it records various transactions. And it gives you the ability to be able to do business directly with the other person without a intermediary, a clearinghouse, an insurance firm, a bank. And we're able to start conducting business without this third party clearinghouse, if you
So
will.
you can actually just trade directly is the fundamental tenet there, right?
Exactly. Why can't you give me a check? Why do I need to go to a bank and have the bank clear the check, say, hey, let me record this in a ledger. Wait, is this really David that's giving Ari the $1,000? Yes, no, yes, clear it, and then clears. Well, guess what? With this new technology, I could send you, David, the information directly, and then have it verified and recorded on this distributed ledger called the blockchain.
So let's go to the extreme of that. So now we're talking about money. We're talking about currency, and because you can't use blockchain with dollars that I know of yet. There's not an example of that, right?
Well, we're going to. I mean, there are companies right now where we'll be able to trade fiat with digital currency and back and forth, but on this distributed foundation of a ledger called blockchain.
So a lot of people are going to have trouble getting their heads around the idea that the bank itself does not need to be involved in the transaction. And I think, what I've heard from my listeners so far is the first reaction to that is, wait a second, I like a bank because it gives me something that I've used all my life, that I trust, that is regulated by a government, which in a lot of cases is a good thing. So how do you get rid of all of those layers and have any semblance of security?
That's a good point. And listen, the banks since the inception of our monetary system has really been the pillars of confidence for our entire financial sector. So look, in the U.S., it may not be a very viable product because you're right, people feel comfortable with the Chases of the world. There's a level of confidence. If the bank loses our money, there is something called the FDIC, right? So there's an element of confidence and trust in the bank. And I would say 99.9% of the people out there do trust the banking system because it's still backed by the U.S. government. Not to get into a political conversation, how long that lasts for. But let's take this conversation, David, and go to Kenya. And let's go to Guinea, and let's go to Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal and South Sudan. And I've been to a lot of these countries too.
Argentina,
Brazil. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And what happens when, most of the population there doesn't have trust in the local government, let alone the banking sector? Let's say the average person in Central Africa has to walk 6.5 miles to the bank. So the concept of banking or the underbanked is a very, very real situation, and blockchain again can solve that problem. So maybe in the US, David, cryptocurrency really won't take off. And if it does take off, I do think it does have to be regulated by the Federal Reserve.
You do, okay.
For sure. There needs, like what we said, there needs to be confidence in there. There needs to be a learning curve, and the government is going to eventually come in and say, yes, it should be done this way. And I do believe in government regulation. But I do think the product, David, is probably going to go a lot further in the emerging markets.
Okay, and it's interesting you mentioned Kenya. I used to do a lot of work in mobile commerce and mobile payments, and Kenya with M-Pesa was one of the first truly highly adopted mobile payment platforms. So the idea of taking that one step further and taking the bank completely out of the equation, a lot of us believe that M-Pesa happened and so many people in Kenya used it because the bank regulators let it happen. They allowed it to happen. But when you take that out of the equation and you just let people trade directly, especially in a society that's already very accustomed, and frankly, a lot more accustomed than Americans to using their phones for financial transactions, it might be a much shorter path to getting them to be able to allow that and to do that.
That's a very good point. And people, a recent survey that I came across, most people would rather leave their money at home than their than their cell phone. So
Right.
it's the center of commerce. And if you think about what you said, if you think about in Nairobi, the local farmer that needs to be able to take cash out of the bank, very, very challenging. But if they have the ability to be able to send money and payments via their cell phone, well, that just stimulates the economy.
Great. Let's talk for 1 second just about how it actually functions, the technology behind it. So I'll give you just what I've told my listeners before in previous episodes as a starting point, and maybe we can dig into it a little bit from there. So effectively, what's happening in blockchain is it's a ledger. It tracks, on the ledger you have who's sending the money, how much are they sending, who are they sending it to, and that's basically the fundamental elements. What is the currency that's being sent? And that's basically it. It does not keep an exact balance of what anybody's account is at a given moment. So effectively, what has to happen is, in the case of when blockchain's used for money, it's got to go back in time, look at every credit to that account, every debit to that account, and then do the math every time. And then it makes what's called a hash, and most of my listeners understand what that is. Basically, a cryptographic string of alphanumeric characters that substitutes for the actual information. So whatever amount of information will create a hash. So it's very hard to take the hash and create the information. It's very easy to take the information and create the hash. So because it's distributed among so many different computers, if anybody tries to mess with that ledger, make a false entry so they get more money, instantly it's wildly visible that ledger is corrupt and it's effectively kicked out of the system. That's how we've talked about it before. Really basic 20,000 foot kind of views. How would you dive deeper into that?
No, I mean, I think you really broke it down very, very well, David. The ability, the fact that all this encrypted information is distributed to thousands and tens of thousands of computers around the world, I would say with almost certainty, it is virtually impossible to be able to hack that. Now, there may come a time where there may be pockets of inefficiencies, but I think that will be self-corrected. And unless you physically go to thousands of computers, take it out of people's homes, take out the information. I mean, as of right now, we haven't seen any major hacking to this distributed ledger.
Well, I love your earlier example of the internet as a kind of an analog for what this is all about, because in the case of information, you put information up on the internet, it can be copied, read by other people, put on other computers. So to get it off of the quote internet would be virtually impossible once information is out there and circulated. So this is effectively the same thing. There is no practical way to go to tens of thousands of computers and try to make the same change without being detected. It can't happen. It would be a heck of a lot easier, frankly, to break into Bank of America's network, which I don't suggest is an easy thing to do, and make a ledger change there.
I never thought about that, David, but you're 100% right. It'd probably be 100 times easier. And we're seeing banks are hacked. Banks are starting to get hacked. It happens. Target, all these big companies are real. They're real. They're on the radar for a lot of companies or a lot of individuals that want to create some havoc. Right. We think of blockchain, we associate Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, but in my opinion, David, it is so much larger than that. We're talking about supply chain too. We're talking about the person, the farmer in the Midwest that picks up a fruit off the floor or hopefully off of the tree, and then sends it onto a ship, and then the ship goes to a distributor, and a distributor goes to another distributor in the US, that goes to a store, and then eventually onto your table. Mm-hmm. Well, blockchain also has the ability to be able to track, right? It's about verifying and recording not only our digital identity, but physical objects as well. So, we're buying a fruit and we're told that it's quote unquote organic. And we just, David, accept that, okay, it's organic. But the reality is, how do we know that it's organic? Well, again, blockchain as it relates to supply chain will actually give us that verification and tell us, yes, this is actually organic, or no, this was processed.
It's fascinating, and I want to emphasize something you said at the beginning of that, which is this is bigger than just money. Now, money, and I agree with you, but money is how our economy, how our society, how our lives work. We use money as that basis. So the idea that something is bigger than money, and again, I completely agree with you on that, gets to the heart of the point of this show, which is everybody really needs to understand this stuff, not because it's going to change your life tomorrow, not because it's going to, make banks go away in the developed world or any time probably in our lifetimes, but the sea change that could come really could touch everything. How products move around. You could actually, you wrote an article, and I'll tell my listeners about it, and I'll include a link to your article in the show notes, how you explain blockchain to your 6-year-old son. And I thought it was brilliant because it described how you can actually take an object all the way back to the time that it was a piece of wood to the time that it was actually turned into something that could be traded for goods and services. So I'll give you an opportunity if you want to talk a little bit about that story. I thought it was spot on.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I sort of painted this picture. I mean, my son hears the words blockchain all the time. So
Yeah.
at least in our house. So it took me a while. Obviously, I can't use a distributed ledger. I can't use these terms. So I
Right.
came up with this magical kingdom, and this guy with a sword. And how does he verify, where the origins of the sword came from? And I think it took me 2 or 3 times to share with him, but I think he finally got it. And I think a lot of blockchain and a lot of this technology, like what you do amazingly on your show and as an influencer, David, is that you take these complicated concepts and terms and you break it down to where the average person could digest it and understand it.
Right.
Otherwise, it just becomes a psychological barrier and something that people are just scared of. No, I don't want my money on something called this block whateverness,
Right.
But the fact that there's influencers and ambassadors out there like yourself, David, is able to make people feel more comfortable. Similarly, when the internet came around in the mid 90s, people were scared to get on the internet. It was the unknown. It was the Wild West. And obviously today everyone is on the web. So
Right.
I think we're in the same space right now in terms of game-changing technology. But I do think what's instrumental is the fact is that we're going to need the ambassadors like yourself. We're going to need the influencers. We'll need the innovators, the creators, to be able to really educate the marketplace.
And education is going to be important because, to your point, nobody has a reason to understand or want to understand blockchain until it starts to creep in slowly but surely into really tangible, meaningful parts of their lives. Some people are looking at it for investments right now, which is great because the value of cryptocurrencies goes up and goes down, just like a share of stock. Well, the value of it will go up and go down. You can make money on that. But in the long term, and that's why I said 10 years, the 10-year time horizon at the beginning of this show, is because in the long term, it could be the technology, whereas we're using, ledgers and databases and central authorities today, we could be using none of that going forward because of one thing, and that one thing is blockchain. So, that's why I believe that anybody who's alive really needs to start to understand it now, because when it's used by your bank or your insurance company or at your job in terms of supply chain logistics or anywhere where it starts to come across your world and the things that you touch every day as an adult, I think people really start to need to take the opportunity now to understand it today.
I agree. And it's an opportunity. Like all the companies, all the people and all the innovators in the late 90s saw this opportunity and saw something called the internet, and
Right.
people were rushing to be able to create companies, and that really stimulated the economy also. This is, I feel, and I think we spoke about this, David, off air a bit, was that this is that other opportunity. I think
Right.
that a window that really only happens once in a decade or once every 20 years. So
Yeah.
there's opportunities like companies I'm working with, companies like Ethereum, that's really changing the way that we transact business. And I think we're going to see a lot of companies in that space. We're going to see companies in the fintech space, in the supply chain. And I just think it's an exciting opportunity for people that love passion, people that love to build things.
Yeah.
And for real entrepreneurs to really make a mark.
I completely agree. And that's another good point why the internet is such a good analog, because there were companies early on that really did it right with the internet. And there are companies now like Ethereum and others that are doing it right at this early stage. But don't get, as a listener, don't get scared away by the ones that don't do it right, because that was true with the internet. There were a lot of missteps. A lot of companies went boom and bust. And that is because they weren't doing it right. So get into it slowly if it's something that you're interested in knowing more about or actually starting to use in your workplace, or with in terms of handling your money or whatever the case may be. But there will be stories that always make the news about a cryptocurrency company or a blockchain company that bumped into a vulnerability. But for my listeners, rest assured, it's never because of a vulnerability with the underlying technology of what blockchain is. It's usually somebody losing their damn password, or just mishandling the wallet that's holding their cryptocurrency, not the blockchain mechanism that's actually keeping all this stuff safe under the hood.
You're right on it, and that's where a lot of companies we're focused on KYC, know your customer. Ethereum has a biometric component to facial recognition. So blockchain is really just the entry point, and then what can we build on top of it? What are the bells and whistles that are going to actually bring this full forward? And it's a very for technologists, and I share David, and for innovators, it's an extremely unique time also. I mean, we're not going to see this, I think, after blockchain. My guess is we're not going to see this for another decade, where there's a really new innovative technology. Obviously, alongside blockchain, we're hearing a lot about artificial intelligence. We're hearing about IoT. But there's going to be a convergence where all that's going to come together.
Absolutely. Well, Ari, thanks for sharing your thoughts. The idea that somebody is such an experienced technology like yourself, who believes that blockchain is literally at the scale of what the internet was back in the 90s, is really, case in point, as far as I'm concerned, that this is something we all need to be paying attention to and looking for ways that it's going to affect all of our personal lives going forward. So thank you for being on the show. Ari, where can people find out more about you and what you do?
My pleasure. You could look at arizoldan.com, ARIZOLDAN.com. You can find me on Twitter. You could also look at Optherium.com to see some of the projects that we're involved in.
Great. And what's the spell Optherium for our listeners, if you could?
It's OPTHERIUM.com.
Fantastic. And for all of our listeners, we will have all these links in the show notes, so you can easily find out more about Ari and all these great companies that he's working with. Ari, that was a fantastic interview. Thanks very much again for being on DIY Cyber Guy.
Thank you, David. It was wonderful.
So that's all the time we have. Remember, we have a free ebook up on our website. That's DIYcyberguy.com/free. You can also send your questions, although we didn't get to any today, at questions@DIYcyberguy.com. And again, it's never been easier to listen. You can download our free podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Player.fm, Stitcher, Overcast, Listen Notes, and also Spotify. And remember, you can buy my book, Digital Habits, on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or just search Digital Habits 5 on Google. So thanks for listening. And to remind you of a quote that a recent guest gave me, Dr. Meyer Rose, he said, cybersecurity is something you do. It is not something you buy. So I hope this episode helped you to see how easy cybersecurity is to do to keep yourself safe online. Thanks for listening, and come back for our next show.
Thank you for listening to DIY Cyber Guy. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this broadcast are for general information only, and we have not knowingly divulged any information that would conflict with any of our non-disclosure or confidentiality agreements. Enjoy the internet safely.